The camera panned across the studio, its lights blazing with a cold, metallic sharpness that made every glance feel urgent, every silence deafening. Rachel Maddow leaned forward at her desk, her eyes narrowing, her notes trembling ever so slightly in her hand. Then suddenly she erupted. It wasn't the carefully measured tone of a seasoned anchor. It was a scream, raw and unfiltered, cutting through the hum of electronics and the shuffling of staff. Viewers at home jolted upright. Producers in the control room froze mid-sentence. Even the steady rhythm of the teleprompter seemed to stutter, as if the very machinery of television wasn't prepared for what had just burst into the airwaves. This was not the Rachel Maddow the audience thought they knew. This was a woman stripped down to conviction, unable to restrain the sheer disbelief at what had just been said on the national stage. What Rachel said next made even her most seasoned producers stop in disbelief. The words carried not only outrage, but also something else, a trembling urgency. A plea for the nation to recognize the insult that had just been hurled against dignity itself.
Ow.
The studio was silent. Except for her voice, the walls seemed to tighten around the moment, framing it like the opening shot of a political thriller. She leaned forward again, her tone sharpening, her voice gaining momentum, her disbelief morphing into righteous fire. And across the screen, viewers weren't just listening, they were holding their breath. Pulled into the storm she had unleashed, clips of her outburst would soon ricochet across timelines and news feeds. But in that instant, live and unfiltered, it was pure electricity. She wasn't shouting for herself. She was shouting for every person who had ever been dismissed, degraded, or demeaned in a place of supposed authority. And then, just as quickly as the shout had come, her voice steadied into something colder, heavier. A pause lingered long enough to unnerve, long enough to remind everyone that what was about to follow wasn't mere television drama. It was the spark of something larger, because Maddow's scream wasn't just reaction, it was recognition. Recognition that a voice, silenced too many times before, had risen. And that voice belonged to Jasmine Crockett. What she said next would ignite a firestorm that no one, least of all her opponent, could have ever imagined. The moment Rachel Maddow's scream echoed through the airwaves, it was clear this was more than just another fiery cable news segment. It was the sound of a political battlefield stretching far beyond the studio walls. A battlefield where words had become weapons, and silence itself could be an accomplice. America was already teetering on edge, polarized, exhausted, yet addicted to the spectacle. Every debate felt like a clash of civilizations. Every headline a test of national character. And now, in the heart of this storm, one voice was about to pierce through the noise with a statement so sharp, so unflinching, it could not be ignored. The stage was set long before Crockett's clapback. The country had grown accustomed to politicians treating dignity as disposable, to public servants being reduced to caricatures by opponents who thrived on mockery. The nightly news had become more gladiator arena than forum of ideas. An audience has tuned in not for consensus, but for combat. This was the environment Rachel was navigating when her scream broke the script. It wasn't an accident. It was a recognition of what so many viewers felt, that the stakes were no longer abstract policies or dry numbers. The stakes were identity, respect, and belonging. Rachel's eruption mattered precisely because it shattered the illusion of neutrality. She wasn't just reporting, she was reacting as millions at home were reacting. Progressives, immigrants, people of color, women, who had seen this story play out too many times before. The sneer, the dismissal, smug interruptions from the so-called gatekeepers of power. Maddow had heard enough, and so had her audience. In that moment, her scream became more than outrage, became validation. It told viewers that their anger was real, their frustration justified, their dignity worth defending. But it wasn't just Maddow who was about to define the night. Enter Jasmine Crockett. Unlike the seasoned anchors and pundits who framed debates, from safe distance, Crockett was standing in the line of fire. She was experiencing it, absorbing it, preparing to unleash a response that would ripple far beyond the chamber where it was spoken. What she was about to say carried the weight of history, the sharp rebuttal of someone who knew what it meant to be underestimated, to be dismissed, and yet to rise anyway. The anticipation was electric.
Out.
Social media was already buzzing with whispers, with clips of Maddow screams serving as a drum roll. The country was on edge, waiting. They didn't know what words Crockett would choose, but they knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. This wasn't just another soundbite destined to vanish in the 24-hour news cycle. This was a cultural turning point in the making, and here lay the unspoken truth. Rachel's eruption didn't simply validate Crockett's place in the conversation, it amplified it. By reacting so viscerally, Maddow framed the moment as monumental before it even happened. Viewers understood. If Maddow was shaken, if Maddow was screaming, then what was coming next had to be seismic, but seismic for whom? For Crockett, who was ready to wield her voice like a blade, or for the figure across from her, the one so convinced of their own superiority, so certain that their dismissal would go unchallenged, that they had no idea what was about to crash down upon them. Because before the country heard Jasmine's words, one figure was already plotting to discredit her. Asterisk to understand why Jasmine Crockett's clapback hit with such force. You have to look at the figure sitting across from her antagonist, whose smirk had already become a familiar sight to anyone following the nation's unraveling debates. This was not a person new to controversy. Their career had been built on it. The sharp tongue, the casual belittling of opponents, the smug confidence that came from years of being cheered on by the loudest voices in the room, it was their trademark. To their supporters, this figure was a warrior who said what others were too afraid to say. To their critics, they were nothing more than a bully in a suit, weaponizing arrogance and disrespect like it was policy, time and again. They had reveled in dismissing those who dared to challenge them. When confronted with substantive questions, they would pivot to ridicule, and caught in contradiction, they doubled down with louder rhetoric, confident that volume could drown out truth. And when addressing colleagues who didn't fit their multimagrants, women, progressives, they seemed to relish the opportunity to condescend, their words dripping with the suggestion that some people simply didn't belong at the table. Hypocrisy was never a stumbling block for them. It was a strategy. One day, they would preach about protecting American families, only to be caught in scandals that betrayed the very values they claimed to champion. Responsibility, while conveniently overlooking the waste and excess funneled to their own pet projects. But through it all, they wore their contradictions as if they were badges of honor, daring anyone to call them out, certain that their base would cheer them on for owning the libs rather than holding them accountable. This was the pattern. Insult, deny, repeat, and it had worked for them, till now. Because across from them sat Jasmine Crockett, who had endured this cycle long enough to recognize the script. Where others flinched, Crockett leaned in. Where others stumbled, she steadied herself. Still, the antagonist didn't see it. They couldn't. Their entire persona was built on the assumption that their sneers would go unchallenged, that opponents would shrink under the weight of their theatrics. They looked at Crockett and saw what they had always seen in women like her, someone to talk over, to diminish, to laugh off. Their arrogance was fed not just by their own voice, but by an echo chamber that celebrated it. On cable networks friendly to their ideology, they were cast as a defender of real America. On the campaign trail, their rallies echoed with chants that validated their every insult. On social media, an army of followers amplified every jab, no matter how cruel, as if cruelty itself were proof of strength, surrounded by applause and insulated from criticism. They mistook volume for substance and mockery for victory. But arrogance has a way of blinding even the sharpest tacticians. In their eagerness to dismiss, they overlooked the rising frustration of a public that had grown weary of bullying packaged as leadership. They overlooked the growing hunger for anyone to stand up and turn the tables. And most dangerously for them, they overlooked Jasmine Crockett's resolve. For Crockett was not walking into that chamber unprepared. Every insult hurled before, every condescending glance, every dismissive shrug had forged her patience into steel. She knew the weight of representation. She knew she wasn't just speaking for herself, but for countless others who had sat through the same treatment in different arenas of life. What the antagonist saw as just another target was, in fact, a voice sharpened by experience, ready to cut through arrogance with precision. Yet even as Crockett gathered her composure, the antagonists leaned back in their chair, smirking, certain of the outcome. To them, this was just another moment to grandstand, to flex their dominance, to remind everyone watching that they controlled the stage. Before the viral moment, before the chamber fell silent, before Rachel Maddow's scream became a meme, there was Jasmine Crockett, the daughter of working-class grit, raised on the unshakable belief that dignity is not given, it is demanded. Her story didn't begin under the glow of TV cameras or the polished floors of Capitol chambers. It began in the quiet grind of neighborhoods too often overlooked, where ambition was seen as audacity, and where the dream of public service came with barriers at every step. From the start, Crockett's journey was marked by being underestimated. Teachers, politicians, even colleagues, many dismissed her as too bold, too unpolished, or simply too much. But what they failed to see was that her refusal to shrink wasn't arrogance. It was survival. It was the shield forged. From years of having to fight harder than others just to claim a seat at the table, for every door that was shut, she learned how to knock louder. For every label slapped on her, she learned how to strip it off and keep walking, her path wound through the hard, thankless trenches of public defense. While others chased prestigious firms and six-figure bonuses, Crockett stood beside clients who couldn't afford anyone else. She saw up close the brutality of a system that promised justice but often delivered punishment. She defended immigrants harassed by bureaucracy, single mothers criminalized for poverty, young men written off before they'd even been given a chance. These cases weren't glamorous. They were exhausting, frustrating, and emotionally crushing. But they were also clarifying. With every client she stood beside, Crockett carved deeper into her soul the conviction that dignity isn't a luxury, it's a right. And dignity was something she had been forced to guard in her own life as well. Entering politics as a black woman meant carrying the weight of a double standard so heavy it could have broken anyone less resilient. Speak too firmly, and she was angry. Speak too softly, and she was weak. Or ambition openly, and she was unlikable. None of these judgments stopped her. They couldn't. Each insult only added kindling to the fire she carried. A fire that refused to be extinguished. The political establishment didn't see her coming. They saw her background and assumed she'd play by the old rules wait her. Turn, temper her voice, dilute her convictions for a seat in the back row. Instead, Crockett charged in unapologetically, making clear she wasn't there to decorate the chamber. She was there to represent, to shake the dust off empty speeches, to remind people that politics wasn't theater, was survival for millions of Americans depending on their leaders to see them. Her rise was not meteoric, it was earned inch by inch. She faced skepticism from donors, dismissals from opponents, and sneers from colleagues who underestimated her resolve. And yet, with every campaign stop, with every community gathering, with every late-night planning session surrounded by volunteers who believed in her mission, Crockett proved she wasn't going anywhere. She didn't need the approval of the powerful to keep going. She needed only the trust of those who saw themselves in her story, the single parents, the immigrants, the working poor, the young women who were tired of being told to wait their turn. For Crockett, representation was never abstract. It was personal. Every time she rose to speak, she carried with her the echoes of those who had been silenced, the faces of those who had been told no too many times, the stories of those who fought for scraps in a system that was supposed to serve them. Her very presence in the chamber was already a clapback to history itself, a defiance of the barriers designed to keep her out, but being underestimated came with its own hidden strength. Opponents laughed off her persistence, misjudging resilience for inexperience. They confused patience with passivity and calm with weakness. That blindness would become their undoing. Because while they smirked, Crockett was watching. They dismissed. She was preparing. And while they leaned on arrogance, she was storing up every ounce of resolve for the moment when it would matter most. She wasn't polished in the way Washington insiders defined it. And she didn't want to be. Her sharp edges were exactly what made her dangerous to those invested in the status quo. She didn't speak in rehearsed sound bites designed to please donors. She spoke from lived experience, a cadence that carried the heat of struggle and the cool clarity of truth. And that combination was magnetic. People leaned in not because she was smooth, but because she was real and now. Seated across from the antagonist who had made a career out of dismissing voices like hers, Crockett was ready. Her story had prepared her. Every courtroom battle, every campaign uphill, every insult shrugged off, it had all been training for this. The chamber thought they were about to watch another predictable exchange, another insult drowned out by arrogance. But they didn't know the fire that was quietly burning inside her, fire that had been building for years. This was not just about politics. It was about identity, dignity, and the refusal to be silenced. And when Crockett finally leaned forward, steady and composed, she was not only speaking for herself, she was speaking for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. This was the exact kind of fire that prepared her for the showdown, that would silence the room. Asterisk, the exchange began the way so many of these moments do, the villain leaning back in their chair, voice dripping with mockery, and a smirk spreading across their face as if the outcome were already written. Dismissed Crockett with a wave of the hand, calling her words naive, sneering that her perspective was emotional rather than serious. The chamber filled with the familiar rhythm of their arrogance, a tone polished by years of bullying opponents into silence. They chuckled to themselves, savoring the performance, convinced they were once again in control. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She sat steady, her eyes fixed, her breathing deliberate. Every dismissive phrase that rolled from their lips only seemed to harden her composure. Where others might have stumbled or rushed to interrupt, Crockett let the insults hang in the air, her silence unnerving, her patience deliberate. She was collecting her energy, steadying her fire, letting the villain dig deeper into their pit of arrogance around her. The room shifted. Colleagues exchanged wary glances. Viewers watching at home felt their jaws tighten. Rachel Maddow, perched at her desk on live broadcast, leaned forward, eyes narrowing, her pen tapping anxiously against the papers in front of her. The frustration on her face mirrored what millions of viewers felt, the raw, familiar outrage of watching dignity being trampled in real time. Every word from the antagonist was like a match tossed into a dry field, sparks threatening to set the night ablaze. The villain's words grew sharper, louder, more theatrical. They mocked Crockett's experience, belittled her qualifications, even questioned her right to sit where she sat. The arrogance was so thick, it seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. And yet there she was, still calm, but visibly gathering. Herself, her shoulders straightening, her focus intensifying with each blow. It was a performance the villain had delivered countless times before, and it had worked. Their strategy was intimidation through belittlement, dominance through noise. But this time was different. The longer Crockett held her ground, the more the tension mounted. Viewers weren't just waiting for her to respond, they were yearning for it, aching for it. Every pause stretched like a held breath. Every insult a coil of energy winding tighter and tighter. Rachel's frustration broke through in flashes and audible sigh, a visible shake of the head, a grimace at each jab. She wasn't just a commentator. She was the audience's vessel. And if Maddow was fuming, if Maddow's composure was cracking, then you knew the audience was seething. The air was electric, charged with expectation. You could feel it in the silence between words, in the way the cameras lingered on Crockett's face, in the stillness of her lips pressed tightly together as if sealing the storm inside her until just the right moment. This was not hesitation. This was preparation. The villain leaned forward for their finale, delivering one last insult, the kind designed to humiliate, to cement dominance, to draw laughter from allies in the room. They smirked, certain they had one. Certain the exchange would end as it always did, with their opponent silenced, diminished, erased. But Jasmine Crockett's eyes lifted, steady and unflinching. Her posture shifted ever so slightly, signaling not defeat, but readiness. The patience was over. The fire was rising, and then, with a single sentence, she flipped the script. The room was thick with arrogance. The villain's smirk, practically carved into stone, as if they believed the chamber itself existed only to echo their voice. Their allies chuckled softly, leaning back in their seats, satisfied that the spectacle was over before it had truly begun. But then Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with the steady grace of someone who had been waiting for this moment all along. Her lips parted, her tone measured, her words sharp enough to slice through the smug haze hanging in the air. "You can dismiss me," she began, her voice low, deliberate. The kind of tone that forces people to lean in rather than tune out. "You can mock my experience, belittle my background, and pretend I don't belong here. But what you cannot do, what you will never do, is erase the truth of why I am here and who I represent." The villain froze, caught off guard by the calm ferocity of her opening. This wasn't the flustered rebuttal they expected. This was precision. Every syllable carried the weight of lived experience. Every pause stretched like the silence before thunder. She continued, her eyes locked on her opponent. "I didn't fight my way here to impress you. I didn't come to this chamber to seek your approval. I came here because the people I represent, the people you dismiss, the ones you write off with a smirk, demand that their voices be heard. And whether you like it or not, I am their voice." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Even those accustomed to tuning out had their attention drawn back. There was no theatrics, no raised volume, just the cutting clarity of someone speaking. With conviction too deep to be ignored, the villains shifted uncomfortably, their smirk faltering for the first time. They opened their mouth as if to interject, but Crockett raised a hand slightly, not in aggression, but in command. The gesture alone spoke louder than words. "I am not finished." And she wasn't. "You talk about real America?" she pressed on, her tone tightening. "But the America you describe is one where people like me don't belong, where our stories don't matter, where our dignity is disposable. Well, let me tell you something. The America I represent is not afraid of. People like MIT depends on people like me. People who work harder, who fight longer, who carry this country on their backs and get nothing but contempt in return." Rachel Maddow's face appeared on the live broadcast split screen, her jaw dropping, her pen frozen midair. K. Maddow's voice breaking through, raw and unrestrained. A scream of approval. Disbelief mixed with elation. A sound that wasn't polished or planned, but purely human. The kind of scream that says, "Yes, finally, say it louder." It was the scream of validation, the sound every viewer at home had been holding inside. Twitter would later replay it endlessly, meme it, remix it into songs, but in that moment, it felt like the crack of a dam breaking. Back in the chamber, Crockett didn't flinch. She used Maddow's eruption as momentum. Her tone lifted, sharpened, and struck again. "You may think your insults make you strong," she said, eyes narrowing, "but strength is not measured in arrogance. Strength is measured in service. Strength is measured in sacrifice. And strength is measured in the ability to rise every time someone like you tries to push us down." The crowd reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, nods, murmurs swelling into audible agreement.
The villain blinked.
Rapidly, their smug armor crumbling. The arrogance that once filled the chamber had evaporated, replaced with a quiet recognition that this was not their stage anymore. Crockett delivered the final blow like a verdict. "So laugh if you want, mock if you must. But remember this. Every time you try to dismiss me, you only make my voice louder. Every time you try to silence the people I represent, you make their fight more urgent. And every time you tell us we don't belong, you remind us exactly why we do." The chamber fell silent. Not the silence of apathy, but the silence that follows a knockout punch. When even opponents can't deny the weight of what just landed. The villains stared blankly, their usual arsenal of insults suddenly useless, their confidence once unshakable, crumbling in real time, brick by brick. Beneath the weight of Crockett's words, Rachel Maddow's scream echoed again, this time joined by applause breaking out in pockets across the chamber. Outside the building, phones lit up as viewers clipped the moment, replaying it, screenshotting Crockett's steady glare, turning her calm defiance into an instant symbol of resistance. On TikTok, teenagers were already adding captions. On Twitter, hashtags exploded, turning her line into a rallying cry. On Instagram, clips of Maddow's scream overlaid Crockett's words like a soundtrack of triumph. In living rooms across the country, families leaned in closer, replaying the moment, whispering to each other. "Did you hear that?" She said what we've all been wanting to say. The villains shifted in their seat, their eyes darting downward. Their usual fire dimmed. It was the image of defeat. Not a loss of office or title, but something deeper. A loss of control. A loss of dominance. A loss of the illusion that their words could go unchallenged forever. Jasmine Crockett, once underestimated, now stood unmistakably tall. Not physically, she hadn't even risen from her chair, but in presence. In command, in the way her voice had turned the entire atmosphere upside down. She was no longer the target. She was the force. And as Maddow's scream echoed one last time, resonating like a chorus for millions watching at home, it was clear this wasn't just a good soundbite. It was a cultural flashpoint, the kind of moment that doesn't just trend, it imprints itself on the collective memory. Clips were instantly clipped, screenshotted, replayed. Commentators scrambled to capture the electricity of what had just unfolded. But the truth was simple. You didn't just watch it. You felt it. And yet, as powerful as the moment was inside that chamber, its greatest impact had not yet been unleashed, because the real explosion came not in the room, but across the entire nation. The chamber may have returned to silence. The outside world erupted. Within minutes, the clip of Jasmine Crockett's clapback was everywhere, snipped, shared, and reshared at lightning speed. Twitter timelines flooded with her words in bold captions, each one paired with fire emojis. Raise fists, or simple declarations like, "She said it for all of us." Hashtags surged to the top of trending lists. Hashtag Crockett Clap Back. Hashtag Dignity Speaks. And yes, hashtag Maddow Screams, because it wasn't just Crockett's words that were spreading like wildfire. Rachel Maddow's unfiltered scream of support became its own cultural artifact, clipped into GIFs that looped endlessly, transformed into sound bites remixed over music, plastered with captions like "Me watching injustice get wrecked live." Teenagers used it on TikTok to narrate their own moments of vindication, missing the bus, but catching it at the last second. Walking out of a bad relationship, finally quitting a toxic job, Maddow's scream was no longer just a reaction. It was a rallying cry, a shorthand for righteous release. Meanwhile, Crockett's lined devastating declaration that strength isn't measured in arrogance became the quote of the day. Journalists replayed it on loop. Anchors dissected it. Columnists praised it as one of the sharpest takedowns delivered on the floor in years. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was performance. It was poetry. It was the moment everyone felt they had witnessed history in the making. The villain, once confident in their ability to dominate the narrative, found themselves on the wrong side of the trending cycle. Memes painted them as cartoonish sweat dripping down their forehead. The smirk wiped clean, their silence magnified as proof of weakness. Headlines spared no mercy. Mockery meets its match. Crockett silences the smirk, the smug, deflated. The figure who had built a brand on arrogance was now being defined by humiliation. Celebrities joined in too. Actors, athletes, and musicians shared the clip with captions like, "This is what courage looks like," or simply, "Iconic." A Grammy-winning singer quoted Crockett's words over a black and white photo of her, calling her the voice America needs right now. A famous NBA player tweeted Maddow's scream with 3 crying laughing emojis and the words, "Me watching Crockett cook." Suddenly, the political world had collided with pop culture, and the effect was unstoppable. On cable networks, the replay was constant. Pundits who normally argued endlessly found themselves united in admitting the power of the moment. Conservative commentators scrambled to downplay it, but their dismissals fell flat against the sheer volume of applause. To spin, social media drowned them out with laughter, with memes. With clips of the villain's face frozen in stunned silence, supporters rallied, not just online but in person. Local community groups organized watch parties replaying the moment, chanting Crockett's words like they were gospel. Fundraising pages tied to her campaign lit up with donations. small amounts flooding in from ordinary people who simply wanted to say, "Thank you. Keep speaking for us." And the ripple didn't stop there. Teachers replayed the clip in classrooms as an example of standing firm under pressure. Activists used it in training sessions as a masterclass in how to confront arrogance with dignity. Parents shared it with their children, saying, "This is why you don't back down when someone tries to belittle you." It had transcended politics. It was now a cultural teaching tool, a story of resilience in real time. Yet through all the noise, the hashtags, the remixes, the late-night was never simply about a politician trying to belittle an opponent, nor about a television host raising her voice in the heat of the moment. What unfolded that night was bigger than politics. It was a reminder etched into the memory of millions that courage, when held steady against arrogance, has the power to shift the ground beneath us. Jasmine Crockett stood in that chamber as more than a representative from Texas. She stood as a mirror for every person who has ever been underestimated, every voice that has been dismissed, every story that has been silenced. She carried herself with the calm of someone who has known struggle, the fire of someone who has survived it, and the dignity of someone who refuses to be defined by the smallness of others. In that sense, her clapback was not just a rebuttal. It was an anthem, and Rachel Maddow, in her scream, became something more than a broadcaster. She was not simply delivering commentary, she was channeling the pulse of the people. Her unfiltered reaction gave permission for outrage, for catharsis, for celebration, amplified what viewers already felt in their bones, that arrogance deserves to be shattered, and dignity deserves to be defended. Maddow's voice broke the fourth wall, binding together the millions who had been holding their breath, waiting for the vindication Crockett delivered. This was the lesson carved into that moment when dignity speaks, arrogance crumbles. The villain's smirk didn't fade because of louder shouting or crueler insults. It disappeared because arrogance cannot withstand truth spoken with clarity. It vanished because bluster collapses when faced with courage that refuses to flinch. Crockett didn't need theatrics. She needed only her voice, firm, sharp, grounded in conviction. And it was enough to pierce through years of mockery, to remind America that integrity will always outlast intimidation. That's why the clip spread far beyond political circles. It resonated in classrooms, in union halls, in family living rooms, in dorm rooms lit by laptop screens. It resonated because it was not about left versus right, Democrat versus Republican, this politician versus that one. It was about something timeless, the right of every person to stand tall against those who try to make them small. It was about justice. It was about courage. And in the deepest sense, it was about Americanness. Because the American story has always been a tug-of-war between those who seek to hoard power through arrogance and those who demand dignity through perseverance. Crockett stepped into that story and reminded us what side of it we want to be. On the crowd reactions, the hashtags, the memes, these were surface ripples of something deeper. The real impact lay in the quiet reflections it stirred. Parents telling children, "This is what standing up looks like." Workers whispering to themselves, "I won't let them belittle me anymore." Communities realizing that representation is not about titles, but about courage. In that sense, Crockett's clapback wasn't fleeting. It was enduring, because moments like this do more than entertain, they fortify. They remind us that arrogance may win headlines, but it never wins hearts. They remind us that truth may sometimes come softly, patiently, but when it strikes, it resonates, and so what Rachel Maddow screamed for was not just a political point scored, it was for the vindication of dignity itself. What Jasmine Crockett delivered was not just a takedown, it was a cultural reset. A proof point that truth spoken calmly can roar louder than arrogance screamed. And that's why this wasn't just a clapback, it was a cultural moment. Asterisk and so. The headline told the truth. Rachel Maddow screams over Jasmine Crockett's statement. Her clapback goes viral instantly. But what that headline couldn't capture was the heartbeat behind it, the collective gasp. The eruption of laughter, the sense of relief that dignity had, for once, taken the microphone away from arrogance. What we witnessed was not a fleeting viral clip. It was a crystallization of something we all hunger for, proof that when arrogance struts too loudly, When power tries to belittle those who stand for justice, it can still be silenced with courage, precision, and truth. Jasmine Crockett embodied that courage,
Maddow.
gave voice to our outrage. And together, they reminded us that even in the loudest storms, dignity still carries further. That's why this moment matters. That's why it went viral. Because it wasn't just about politics, it was about us. It's about every person who has ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or silenced. Crockett stood her ground, Maddow screamed our feelings, and together, they exposed the hollow shell of arrogance for what it truly is. And now, it's our turn. Share this story. Keep it alive. Let the clip, the scream, the clapback echo across every feed, every screen, every conversation. Because spreading this moment isn't just entertainment, it's participation. It's how we remind the world that truth is louder than mockery, and that dignity, when defended, always prevails. So subscribe, join this community, and keep standing tall with us, because every voice matters. And every clapback against injustice brings us one step closer to dignity.